probably hear my kids and my dog in the background because they're all loud.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm going to start. Let's see. Okay, I'll hit start. People joining in. It's fun to watch the numbers go up. Welcome, everybody. As you come in, please introduce yourself in the chat. We love to see who's with us. And welcome, everybody, to the Quarantine Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. I am so excited to be here tonight with all of you again and to be in conversation with our distinguished author, Laura Lippman, who I will introduce in a moment. Thank you to the National Endowment for the Humanities for sponsoring our online programming and to jewishLIVE for being a fabulous partner for us. For those of you who are new to JWA, we are a digital archive that helps expand the Jewish narrative by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories with a broad definition that includes women like Laura who are raising Jewish children. We draw on the richness of our history for insight about the world today. I invite you to check out jwa.org, where you will find so many stories and resources and wonderful treasures. This is only one of many different kinds of projects and resources that we offer. A moment of logistics. Please introduce yourself, as I said, in the chat box, and ask your questions in the chat box. I will share them in the course of our conversation. And when you add your chat, make sure that you're chatting to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your question. I am delighted to introduce Laura Lippman, who is our featured author tonight. Laura is the New York Times bestselling author of 24 novels. Is that right?
I think that's right.
That's you can barely keep track, including the Tess Monahan series, also short stories, and her latest, which is a collection of essays called My Life as a Villainess. She has won virtually every major award given to U.S. crime writing, including the Edgar Award, Anthony Award, Agatha, Nero Wolfe Award, Seamus Award, and the Quill Award. And before becoming a full-time novelist, Laura was a reporter for 20 years, including 12 years for her hometown paper, the Baltimore Sun. Welcome, Laura. We're so glad to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
So you have been a reporter and a novelist, and now most recently a writer of personal essays. What prompted that shift?
I'm almost embarrassed to tell the story because it doesn't put me in a good light. But if anything, this book has indicated that I'm willing not to put myself in a good light sometimes. Writing essays has sort of become part of the marketing piece of being a novelist. And they would say when you had a book coming out, would you do a blog tour? Could you write for this? Could you write for that? And I was happy to do it, but I began thinking about it in a broader way. And I thought, well, if this is how we do things, what if I aim for some bigger venues? What if I see if I can get paid to do it? I really like writers to get paid for their words. I just think it's important. And I turned it into a project. It actually became almost, I think, a New Year's resolution for 2018 to start writing essays for non-crime readers. Because I was like, if the crime fiction readers don't know me right now, I've got a problem. But I want to get myself in front of people who think they don't like crime fiction and who might like my voice enough or my takes enough to say, well, I don't read crime fiction, but I might read a book by her. And I started just sort of in the arenas I knew best, which were books. And I think the first piece I pitched was to the New York Times book section. They used to do a column called The Enthusiast, where you wrote about a writer that you loved, but maybe people didn't know them that well. And I did that. And I, with the help of Tappy Broadesser-Ackner, who has just been the best friend and accomplice in all of this, I pitched a piece for the travel section. And I was just sort of taking these baby steps. And then one night toward the end of 2018, so this year of my resolution, I was up late. I had been drinking wine at dinner. I feel that that is a relevant detail. And I found out that this venue that I knew through Twitter called Long Reads, which boasts curates and commissions pieces, had this section called Fine Lines. And Fine Lines was about life, I think over 50, certainly life about older people. And it was edited by Sari Botten, whom I knew from the collection. Oh, good Lord, I just blanked completely on her. Goodbye to All That, her incredible collection of essays about people leaving New York City and other work too. And it turned out we followed each other on Twitter, so I could DM her, totally unprofessional. I am a little buzzed. I'm like, hey, I want to write about being the oldest mom, because I am the oldest mom. My daughter was born when I was 51. And I remember, like another mom at the Montessori school saying, I used to be the oldest mom, but now that you're here, I never have to worry about that again.
You won the title.
Yeah. And I pitched that piece in November or December of 2018, was given a really long lead time, which was a good thing because it turned out that the essay that resulted, which was called Game of Crones, most of the stuff in it I hadn't even lived yet. Like a lot of that essay would be stuff that happened to me in February of 2019. That essay appeared right before Mother's Day 2019. Sari and Longreads immediately said, you can write more for us. And I did. And by the time I wrote my second piece for them, which was called The Whole 60, about how I decided at the age of 60 that I actually really, really did like the way I looked, my longtime editor, Carrie Fearon, who's edited all of my books, said, do you think you could do a book of these? And I said, the stupidest thing you could ever say ever, which is, sure, how hard could it be?
So what was it like to put the first person into your work and write in a different way?
Well, it was certainly a change. And I did struggle always with never wanting to hurt or offend or expose anyone close to me. The writer Joyce Maynard, with whom I've taught, has said to her students, write like you're an orphan. It's not bad advice, but at the same time, I don't feel that anyone should have to risk any humiliation just because, by luck of the draw, they're connected to me. So I really did try to hold harmless, which is to say, not write anything embarrassing about any living person. My sister does not appear in the collection at all. I'm sure she's delighted by that. She's very private. I feel that I'm really kind to my mom, to any friend that I name by a name, to my spouse, to my child. I mean, in the end, it's for all of them to say how they feel. The one time my mom raised an objection was when I published an essay that is in the collection, but it first appeared in the New York Times Magazine. And it's about my commitment to my double boiler. That is
I love that piece.
Dad, and again, Taffy Broadus-Rackner was the person who kind of pulled that piece out of me. She kept saying, Laura, you just can't say, I like my double boiler. You have to dig deeper. And it tells a story about my father that would embarrass him were he alive. And I was on the phone with my mother, who's very proper and very reticent, and kind of waspy. And she said, Laura, now it was one thing to write these pieces when they were just about you, but now they're bringing up family stories. And I said, yeah, well, Mom, Daddy's dead. I would never have written that piece if he were alive. I would have respected that, but he's gone. He's not with us. And so I felt like that was okay. The one thing that surprised me is that I had no desire to sugarcoat anything about myself, which is not to say that I told all. There's plenty of stuff I didn't tell. I don't think anyone's entitled to all. But in taking on the topics that I took on in this book, being an old mom, dealing with 5 decades of hating my body, menopause, strange behavior around eating when I was in my 20s, et cetera, being a bad friend, the thing I came to realize when they were all done was that these were topics where I had found some peace. If I'm writing about it, I've kind of figured it out. Maybe figured it out while I was writing about it, but like each one of these pieces for me was like a little journey to, hey, I'm okay with this now. I can talk about this now because it doesn't bother me.
Well, and that brings me to the title of your book, which I thought was really interesting, right? My Life as a Villainess. And I was curious about why you chose that kind of angle, especially because you say in the book that you're basically, you know, a good girl and you had to look pretty hard to find those moments of villainy. And you, as you said, you unearthed things about yourself that, you know, ways in which you've been a bad friend or getting in trouble in your daughter's school or leaving your first husband. But, you know, why was it important for you to turn that more kind of critical or put your gaze on the things that felt less, you know, easy or attractive about yourself?
You know, first of all, villainous is just such a great word. It's just so great. And that was the oldest essay in the book. It had never been published. It had never been published in part because in its first incarnation, when it was written for an anthology called Bad Girls, edited by Ellen Sussman, it was flagged by the legal department at Norton. And I was told, we are worried that you have given your ex-husband grounds to bring some kind of legal action against you.
Huh, interesting.
I reworked the essay slightly. I mean, I appreciated their concern. I appreciated they were looking after me. But that's such a seminal moment for me in terms of what it taught me about my own writing. I was writing crime novels, and this revelation that I was the bad guy in someone else's story was so new to me and so interesting. And I use the word villainous because I find it arch and a little bit one-dimensional. And of course, that's what I'm trying not to write in my crime fiction. I'm trying to write not villains, but people who do bad things, because lots of ordinary people do bad things for all sorts of reasons. But there's something about that essay when I looked at it again, I was like, this really is the heart of the book. It's the heart, sort of the beginning of this journey in which I was able to look at my behavior at the end of my first marriage and say, I don't care what anyone thinks or believes or what my friends try to tell me. I was ruthless and I wasn't always honorable and I was out for myself, and I'm utterly unapologetic about that. I really am. And then the second piece of that is, if you can say that I was ruthless and I'm unapologetic about it, then you have to concede that someone else gets to consider you the bad guy in their story. Yeah, I've been told it's an old theatrical joke, which I didn't know, but it's a line that I laugh at every time I watch Shakespeare in Love when they're all in the pub. And the actor who plays the nurse is asked what Romeo and Juliet is about. He begins, it's about this nurse. All of our stories begin with us. It's just so normal and natural. It's human. So, you know, I chose this title, this essay, to sort of put front and center. I know I'm not a villainess. If anything, I'm a little bit too much of a goody-goody. And in the past couple of months, I've taken to describing myself as a recovering perfectionist, which is funny because until a couple of months ago, I thought of myself as someone who had fallen short of being a perfectionist and that was a bad thing. I thought I should be more of a perfectionist. I knew all the ways in which I wasn't perfect, which of course is a very long list, because who is? And all of it bugged me. And then I sort of flipped it. I was like, maybe trying to be perfect in anything is a really bad idea because it's impossible. And I think in part writing this book sort of brought me over the bridge and into this point of which is, no, I don't want to be perfect. If anything, I want to be gloriously imperfect and to be very clear-eyed about who I am that I can't change and where maybe I could do a little bit better like, I really do need to work on the friend thing. I just do. I'm not great at it. And, you know, inevitably there were people who read that essay and said, Laura, you're a good friend. I'm like, so far. I might let you down. And I mean, you know, when you're conscious of a weakness, you can work on it. There is some weird innate reticence that I have to conquer to be a better friend. Like, I'm the person who forgets to say, how are you doing? What do you need from me? What can I do? Because there are all sorts of subjects that I'm very nervous around. I was brought up in this very, very proper Southern family. And it's like, don't ask about anybody's age. Don't talk about illness. Don't talk about how much money people have. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about that. I think it's part of the reason I became a reporter is because you get to ask all of those questions as a reporter.
Right.
But in personal life, it's really something I've struggled with, which is, what should I say? How much should I say? What should I offer? It's still a day-to-day struggle.
It's so interesting, the kind of cultural impact of those things. I also loved that you brought a gender lens to a lot of those questions. And one of my favorite lines in, I think it was in the essay, that's from which the title comes, but where you say, one of the great ironies of my life is that I achieved gender parity by becoming an asshole. And, you know, I think that so much of your book is pointing out that we have such double standards for who's allowed to have what kind of behavior, and behavior that might be, you know, identified as kind of quote unquote villainous in women is like totally acceptable for men. And then part of like the flip side of that also is being okay with being an asshole is also about letting go of needing to be liked all the time, which is such a thing that most women struggle with. And you write about that a lot too. And particularly about the, you know, the expectations that people have for older women, or the ways, you know, the ways in which cultural norms are so dismissive and hateful of older women. And you write about that effort of learning to be able to both see yourself in a positive light or say good things about yourself, and also not focus so much energy on whether you're seen as desirable.
You know, I think a lot of this actually came from the fiction writing side, because I teach fiction and I've been teaching for years. Well, it's the programs mentioned in the book, at the program at Eckerd, where I've made these incredible friends, and I hope I haven't disappointed any of them yet. I haven't pissed off Anne Hood yet, so I'm happy about that. She's one of my dearest friends. But so I teach fiction, and a lot of my students are very ambitious and trying very hard to publish, and more are. I'm so proud of them. I'm seeing more and more of my students publish every year, and that's fantastic. And there's this thing that happens in publishing where when a book is being rejected, editors strive to say something nice that maybe not be quite true, and it's really not useful. So a lot of my students were coming into these classes saying, I'm told that my main character isn't likable. And I would say, no. That's like someone saying, I can't go out with you this Saturday night because I have to wash my hair. They're just saying something. Don't attach so much significance. Likability is a complete fraud. It's not important in fiction. What's important is whether people want to spend time with your character. And there are a lot of really hateful, unlikable characters. I mean, one of the books that I loved, I wouldn't call her hateful. In the end, she's quite endearing. But the book, Eleanor Oliphant, is completely fine. She's a difficult character. And when you get to the end of her story and you know why she's a difficult character, the book, you know, opens up, and it's like your heart opens up to it. But you spend a lot of time with a rather odd person who's not someone you want as a friend, but you're fascinated by her. You're like, what's her story? So as I began to talk to my students about the importance of not likable characters, but interesting characters, charismatic characters, people where, well, I'm gonna talk about a little bit of my love for Howard Stern, which is something that can be seen as very non-PC, although if people catch up with who he is now, I think they would judge it differently. And if you go back to the movie Private Parts, they're like doing the audience demographics, and they're like, the people who hate him continue to listen to the show. Like, why does that happen? They go, I need to know what he's going to say next. And to me, like, I'm always saying to people, do you like Hannibal Lecter? No, but you'll read a book about him, right? So when I applied that rule to myself of I don't need to be likable. I mean, the funny thing is I think I am likable. But I also know, and I've worked very hard at this, and I talk so much to younger women about this, is that I believe women should be confident. I don't believe they should be self-deprecating. When I'm saying not positive things about myself, I don't consider it self-deprecation because I'm not looking to be contradicted. To me, this is just factual. I'm this and that. I infuriate men with my confidence, mainly much older men. It really makes them mad. And I've had people be incredibly rude to me because I won't like dig my toe in the dirt and do the little humble brag of, oh, I guess I'm doing okay. I mean, is it good if your book makes it to number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list? I mean, I'm like, no. I say to the young women I know all the time, the line from Gypsy, I'm like, sing out, Louise. Don't wait for someone else to do it for you because they're not going to. So you might as well do it for yourself.
It's been so interesting for us at JWA. We have a program for teens, for teenage girls, a writing program, a kind of a thought leadership program called the Rising Voices Fellowship. And a lot of the work some of the work is about sort of training them to know more about feminism and history and to kind of understand the legacy that they're inheriting and carrying forward. But a lot of it is also to teach them that their voices matter and that they can shape conversations in their communities. And one of the things we've had to work with them on quite a bit is giving them permission to promote themselves and to share their work. And they're great about giving each other positive feedback and sharing each other's work. And then when it comes to their own essays, they feel nervous to promote them because they feel like it's bragging or they feel like it's too self-promotional. And we've had to say to them, look, no, that's part of leadership. Like part of leadership is putting yourself out there and taking pride in what you've written and not being embarrassed to put your, to say like, I have something to say. And it's really hard. And it's something that, often the moms of these teens will say to us, I'm so glad that you're teaching my daughter this. Like, can you teach me this too? Because I'm still learning it now, right? In middle age.
This fear of bragging fascinates me. I mean, I've seen it across multiple generations. It's with my daughter now. I was a volunteer big sister 20 years ago. It was a problem then. Like this constant taboo, especially with females, about don't brag, don't brag, don't brag. Don't make it, declarative sentences that end with periods, make it do all that upspeak. But when I was at the newspaper, I began to notice that when the editors would come around to compliment people on stories, my male colleagues would tell them, basically, it was like they would begin to tell them, no, it was even harder than you thought it was. They would tell them all the ways that they had actually exceeded expectations, and it was harder than you thought, and this is and they would take and the female colleagues would explain why, oh, I got really lucky and this fell into my lap and I didn't deserve the attention. And again, I was just like, just say thank you. It's not, that's fine. Just say thank you. Say thank you. I'm glad you liked it. And it is so interesting how hard that is to do as a woman. And it's so interesting how it can infuriate people when you do.
Right. It's not what people are expecting. I was thinking even one of the great lines in one of your essays is when you're writing about this, you say, I've decided I like the way I look and I'm the expert who has spent more time looking at me than I have. And I love that because you're both embracing the positive, viewpoint on yourself and also embracing expertise, which is also like a hard thing for women to do often, right? To say like, I'm the expert in this. And even if it's in yourself, it's like, I just think that's a great double embrace there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's so interesting. And I was just talking to a good friend the other day about maybe we just even actually need to move on. Like maybe the step beyond body positivity is just not caring at all what our bodies and our faces look like. Is that not the next frontier in which we just kind of completely shed those values of who cares what I look like? Why is that important? I have a friend / reader from Australia, and she's incredibly devoted to crime fiction, and she will travel to conventions throughout the world, which is how I met. And when I was in Australia, we went for drinks. So I've known her for a long time and I really admire her. And we were engaged in a conversation on Facebook, and she told the story about how there was a photograph of her and she didn't like it. And she was, sort of complaining to female colleagues, I don't like this photo of me. And they said, oh, no, you're much, much prettier than that. And she said, no, I know I'm not pretty. And I don't aspire to be pretty, and it is not important to me to be considered pretty, but this is just not what I look like. And I thought, okay, that's next level. That's, I aspire to that.
It is so hard, and it's a constant process. It's not something you learn once and then you're done. It's like, it's an everyday kind of learning. So a big chunk of your book is also about, as you mentioned, being a, sort of late motherhood, being an older mother. As you said, you became a mom at 51. And it is such an interesting thing today. I remember when my kids were in preschool noticing that the parents ranged in age from about 25 to 55 and thinking, wow, that's quite a spread. It's really different at different ages. So you say in your essay that, that the case against late motherhood is sort of obvious, but I'd love to hear you talk about the case for late motherhood, because there are so many older mothers now, and there's definitely benefits that come along with it.
So I know that typically the first kid is the one where everything is so fraught, and then you have a second kid and you're utterly relaxed. And I was very much a second kid. I benefited from it. I kind of went straight to relaxed. I was reading some of the famous preparing to be a mom books, and I found them to be really heavy on fear mongering. I was like, I just can't do this. I was just like, and I had good friends who had, become moms who had some really good basic advice. I just stopped reading all the books, and overall my attitude was, how hard could this be? I mean, I knew it could be very hard in terms of energy and emotion, but I also felt like it just can't be that impossible to raise a kid. And, I kind of feel like, yeah, I mean, I'm super relaxed about school. Like my kids' grades, like, it's like, if she's happy, I'm happy. And if she's not happy, I say, well, I guess maybe you should work harder. Or maybe you're just not ever going to be good at that subject. I don't care. It's third grade. It's like, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, she does have this overachieving brother who's 16 years her senior. I do feel bad about that, but I can't control that. I'm pretty relaxed. I think energy is a challenge, but I take really good care of myself and actually have pretty high energy levels. I think that, I just think I have a lot to offer my kid because I'm really happy with where I am in my career and my life. So whatever's going on, and you know how much can be going on, and like there's, oh my God, I have to get you from here to there, from here to there, and you need this and you need that. I'm at a place in my life where I can do those things and I don't feel it's costing me anything in terms of my work. The pandemic has been so interesting, and I always struggle with the right words. It's a great tragedy. Almost 200,000 people in the United States are dead. And that strikes me as not something that we should be comfortable with or ever, no matter what little silver linings we find in our own life, we should never ignore the tragedy that's happened to people and the cost to our economy and the very real fear of mothers bearing a disproportionate brunt of this. But for me, it was a chance to see that I was super, super busy doing all this toing and froing and so worried about time. And then it was like, well, it turned out that so much of the stuff I was doing didn't matter. I mean, what matters is writing. That's what I do. I have plenty of time to do that. And I had more time to hang out with my kid. My kid's doing remote learning, and there's a schedule in which there's always an adult sort of on site, even though she's pretty self-autonomous with this. I couldn't have been happier today, making my kid a hot lunch, being here to help her with a math problem, but knowing also that I would still get my work done. I think, and I know that that's a line I've written somewhere. It might be in the book. I think it is in the book, and still somehow the work gets done. That's what I know. And I think that was the big advantage of being an older mother, is I knew I'd get my work done. I'd always gotten my work done. And I was so offended at the women in my life who wanted to tell me that I wouldn't get my work done after I had a kid. But you know what? It would have been okay. It would have been fine if I didn't get my work done. I find it so odd that there were females in my life who, with such sour glee, wanted me to struggle with my work after having a kid. I still can't wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, that is interesting. It does feel like it can be such a, I mean, I think for so many women, figuring out how to balance everything is such a struggle, and there's no, we're all kind of left to do it, figure out what works on our own. So maybe there's just a sense that leads to competition around how well can people do it, and everyone has their own ways. I think you're right that this, this whole experience of the pandemic has been an opportunity to kind of, for all the things that have been horrible about it, and there have been many things and many ways that it has, as you said, weighed very very heavily, unevenly on women. It's an opportunity for a reset. The question will be whether we actually are able to do that. I think that's the real challenge, is what do we learn from it, and what systems can we create so that we're not all scrambling to figure out how to make it work on our own.
I recently said, well, I've said my last yes. I've yesed my last yes of 2020. And then a week later, I yesed another yes. But, okay, but this is different, and the people involved, and I want to do this. But there really is this sense of evaluating, like, do I want to do this, and why? And it's funny. I used to like going out on book tour because it gave me a break from home that I guess I felt I desperately needed. Except I don't think I really needed to get away from home. I felt that because of my spouse's work schedule, I had done such a disproportionate amount of kind of de facto single parenting that it felt like I was, settling a score. Like, this is my time. This is my turn to be out and about. It was like, yeah, I don't know why. It really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, my spouse wasn't swanning around on a yacht. He was working 14 to 16 hours a day in another city, that he was actually giving up a lot more than I was, in a way, that it just, that you become so focused on this, oh, this isn't fair. And look, I love virtual book tours. This is the best thing in the world to me. It's like I'm sitting at my dining room table, and when we're done tonight, I have a no second commute back home.
Right. You don't even need to wear pants.
I'm wearing denim shorts. I admit, I put that up on Twitter. That usually I do try to dress from head to toe for these things, but tonight it's just so humid in Baltimore. It's like I'm just getting shorts on.
What has writing been like for you during the pandemic?
It was really interesting because so the way my writing career started is I was working full time at the Baltimore Sun, and in order to write a book a year, which is kind of the expected pace of a mystery writer, I had to develop the system in which I got up every morning, like at 5:30 or 6, and I wrote until I went to the office. And I talked about that as, it's like, if you're trying to save money, they tell you, take money off the top of your check, pay yourself first. Well, I needed time, so I paid myself first with my time. And so I would go in having written at least 1,000 words every day, and then I would work, and then the whole world could do whatever it did, and I would have done my writing for the day. So when the pandemic started and when the stay-at-home orders began in my home state of Maryland, I had a book that was overdue. That is rare for me. And it's only the second time it's ever happened. And it probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't stopped to write my life as Villainess. But it was due in February. And it wasn't close to being done. And now I'm under a stay-at-home order with a fourth grader. And at first I just thought, well, this is catastrophe. And I went full circle back to where I began. I began getting up at 5 and I would work until 8:30 or so. My daughter got up. And in that way, I finished that book by June 1st. I not only finished it by June 1st, I found that my focus was intense. I was really happy with the book that I submitted on June 1st. And like, you know, in February, I'm like, I don't know what's going on in this book. I don't know how I'm going to ever make this end. I don't know how I make these things happen. I don't know how to explain any of this. I mean, about half of the book was written and yet, and there were other like little pieces everywhere. It helped me focus. It helped me do the book. And I've been, by my standards, I've been incredibly lazy. I turned the book in on June 1st. I got my notes back from my editor in the US and my editor in the UK. And I think I had to turn it back at some point in July. And I've just gotten the copy edit. And in those spaces where the book has been away and coming back to me, I've done almost, I'm going to say I've done almost nothing, and I have to laugh at myself. So nothing to me means that I wrote an afterword for a new edition of Marjorie Morningstar. I'm very excited about that. I wrote a piece to The Guardian about my life during the pandemic. I worked on some personal essays, but I don't necessarily think I'll publish them. I'm working on a short story.
So I think your standards for productivity are particularly high.
Yeah, but I feel really great. I've been very home focused and sort of loving that home focus. You know, I think that's the other thing too, is that women are like, oh, if I'm too focused on the home, that's wrong too. I was like, you know, I'm a huge fan of a book. What is it called? It's by the writer Cheryl Mendelson, who wrote a wonderful novel, I think called Morningside Heights. She wrote this huge compendium about housekeeping, which is called Home Comforts. Mm. Just a great read. I mean, it's a book where, you know, you read things like, well, you know, you can air your sheets out in the morning or immediately make your bed. And it's just like, I love it. It's like, I love it. I like home and hearth. I'm very happy here.
Right. It's nice to have time for that in a different kind of way. I love to hear that there is a new edition of Marjorie Morningstar coming out, and how cool that you got to write the foreword. And I know that one of your books was actually sort of inspired by Marjorie Morningstar.
Lady in the Lake, which was last year's book, was absolutely inspired by Marjorie Morningstar, particularly by this idea of the last chapter, which is a chapter that's always confounded me. But I was just interested in the idea of, we know the story of that night from Wally's point of view. You know, what did Marjorie think? What happened? And I think Marjorie never thought about it again. She's happily married to Milton Schwartz and her life went on. But I created this alternative universe with a character named Madeline Morgenstern Schwartz, who just bolts out of her marriage. And it was interesting in writing the afterword and sitting down and really thinking hard about, why does this final chapter exist? He's way too smart to write this without a higher purpose. It can't be just, you know, oh, Wally figured out that he's never going to know Marjorie at 19 again. Woke was such a religious person, and his Judaism was so important to him. He's Orthodox, and he cared deeply about this. But at the same time, I don't think that he was so provincial as to say that religion was the only answer in life. But I do think that the ending of the book is telling us that you have to care about something. There has to be something bigger than you that gives your life meaning. Religion is one of those things. But if it's not religion, what will there be? And there's this beautiful line where Marjorie says, who isn't dreaming? And this idea that dreams, in fact, may be the umbrella under which we find meaning, that our hopes and our ambitions and these things that take us out of ourselves. So it was really a great assignment. I was very glad I said yes to that.
Mm. Well, I really enjoyed what you imagined, you know, the sort of alternative you imagined in Lady in the Lake, which you set in 1966. And it's this, you know, story of this Jewish woman from Baltimore who goes from being a housewife to a reporter and solves some crimes along the way. And I loved, as a historian and someone who has studied a lot about the history of feminism, it was really interesting to see where you place the story sort of, you know, in kind of the middle of a time when feminism was kind of re-emerging, but maybe not when we think of it as having re-emerged, right? Like we often tend to think of things happening a little bit later in the 60s. So to see this woman who was really a little bit ahead of her time and making this change in her life that was quite shocking to people around her, that probably many of her peers would have made years later, maybe a few years later. How did you come to that particular story and placing it there and creating this, you know, you've written so much about this other private investigator, Tess Monahan. How did you come to create this this Jewish housewife in Baltimore / crime fighter?
So it's always been sort of planted in the Tess Monahan stories that her parents met while working as volunteers on the governor's race in 1966. And then we had this election in 16 that everybody, I always feel safe saying this, everybody had a lot of feelings. 2016, I was finishing up a book that I would publish in 2018, and I noticed that there were these really interesting parallels between the presidential race of 2016 and the governor's race in Maryland in 2016, and including the fact that in Maryland you had this kind of demagogue, racist running for office, except he was the Democrat. And Democrats left their party and voted for the Republican and gave him the victory. And that was Spiro Agnew. And that's what gives us Agnew. And it was just, so, you know, I mentioned that I've been working with the same editor, Carrie Fearon, for my entire career. And I remember I was having lunch with her, my agent, and I talked about how I was having this idea about a book that would be a prequel to the Tess Monahan novels, and it would be about how her parents met. And she just said, I'm just throwing it out there, it was a very open-ended question, does it have to be a prequel? Which I think was meant to say, the thing about a prequel is everybody knows how it ends, so the real possibility of suspense is difficult. And I was like, maybe not. And I'm an absolute disbeliever in anything woo-woo or fated or destiny or astrology, unless it happens to me, and in that moment I believe in it. And so I was taking a walk, I can see myself, it was this bright, cold February day. And I was thinking about the end of Marjorie Morningstar, and I was like, maybe there's something there. Maybe I was like, I don't know, but I think maybe that's my novel, but set in 66. And I came home and I turned on the computer, and it was either on Facebook or Twitter. My friend, the divine novelist Megan Abbott, happened to be posting photographs of old Catskill resorts. And it's a sign. It's a sign. I must write about this. And the thing about 66 is that once I sort of cracked open the box of 1966, first of all, it's not the year that most people write about when they write about the 60s. People tend to do sort of the pre-JFK assassination, we were so innocent and then this happened. Or they go for 68 and 69 when the tumult has really begun. But 65 and 66 is when it's all beginning. And 66, and first of all, I already had this election, although it became so unimportant in the book. 66 is when the Baltimore City Police Department begins to try to be truly integrated. Up until that year, Black police officers are allowed only to walk a beat or work in vices undercover. They're not allowed to drive patrol cars, have radios. That came up. And just more and more stuff began coming up. The more I looked in 1966, it was the beginning of a lot of urban unrest. There were stories, because I do end up going to my library, the Enoch Pratt, and reading a lot of archived materials. I often tell people that when I'm writing a novel that has any sort of historical edge to it at all, I like to go look at magazines and read the advertisements. Because the advertisements tell you what people were yearning for in that time. What were they aspiring to? And it can be really interesting. So 66 turned out to be just super juicy. I was so happy. And I was actually using the inspiration of two crimes, the murder of a young girl and the mysterious death of Shirley Parker. Those actually happened in 1969. And I was fascinated by the fact that I knew everything about the real life case that involved the death of 11-year-old Esther Leibowitz. And I had never heard of Shirley Parker, the so-called Lady in the Lake, until I became a reporter at the Baltimore Sun in 1989.
Right. Well, we know that throughout history and today, there are some stories that seem to matter more, certainly to the press, but culturally than others. In one of your essays, you talk about some of the foremost chroniclers of Baltimore. You particularly mentioned John Waters. JWA, we are big fans of Baltimore. Several of our founders are from there: Barbara Dopkin, Brenda Brown Reaver, Nancy Schwartz Sternoff, Lee Hendler. We had a lot of founders in Baltimore. And we actually did a big oral history project in Baltimore about 15 years ago called Weaving Women's Words, that focused on 30 Jewish women who had been community leaders in Baltimore, sort of whose lives span the 20th century. So I would say that you are also a major chronicler of Baltimore. Do you see that as sort of part of your role as a writer?
I do, and I'm very proud of it. And I'm very aware that when people think about Baltimore, of course, they would first talk about Ann Tyler. Ann Tyler's a great novelist. She's a great novelist whose novels are set in Baltimore, but I don't think she's particularly interested in Baltimore. That just is her setting. I will say of the man to whom I'm married, David Simon, The Wire is not particularly interested in Baltimore. It just happens to be set there. It could have been set in Cleveland or Buffalo or Akron or sort of the new Rust Belt city. A lot of my work is really driven by my interest in Baltimore. Like, what is Baltimore? What does it mean to live here? What is the experience of living here? My next novel is about sort of a Baltimore expat who's forced to return here and doesn't want to be here, which is kind of the opposite number of me. I love this city so much, and I've chosen it. And something that makes me laugh really hard is whenever there are these little like spats on social media where people think I live in a gated community in Hollywood, for example. I hear that one a lot, or I hear it indirectly, I should say. And I can't imagine living that way. We live in pretty down-to-earth South Baltimore neighborhood. My kid goes to a public school. I know my neighbors. I mean, I'm cheek by jowl with my neighbors. I live in a row house, for God's sakes. So yeah, Baltimore has often been part of the story I'm trying to tell. And it's interesting because race is so central to that story. It's not always central to the stories that I tell, but I always have to come back to it because you just can't write about Baltimore without talking about race. It's part of everyday experience here, where you'll have a dozen encounters where you really need to think about institutional racism and how other people have been affected by it. And I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say in my roundabout way, I don't always achieve this, but I wake up every morning hoping that I can kind of be the anti-Karen. I was joking about this on social media this week. I've lived peacefully in Baltimore for so many years, in this neighborhood for 18 years. I had 2 really bad encounters in the space of 12 hours and found myself calling 911 on a Sunday night because I saw a man being incredibly verbally abusive to his girlfriend. And I just felt that it was not, that there needed to be intervention. And the next morning I was startled and felt that I was on the verge of being attacked by a young man when I took my morning walk. And I was like, well, I'm just really pleased to say that when I call 911, I'm reporting white guys. Like, at least I'm doing my part. I'm really aware though I'm aware of the fact, first of all, that I'm in the minority. And I think that's a positive thing. I think it would benefit white people in general to have spent time being in the minority and not having that expectation that they're the default, that they're, that's like, it's their culture, their life, and everything else is sort of just, a different genre that they sometimes indulge in. And I'm really aware in Baltimore of poverty, of the incredible trauma that is done to people just by living in places where violence happens. People, it's such a funny thing. They'll say, Baltimore spends more money per student than these really wealthy districts in Montgomery County and Howard County, and they don't have as good of results. Why is that? And it's like, do you understand what Baltimore City students are dealing with? Do you know how hard their lives are? Of course it costs more. And of course they need more. And that's just not a fair comparison. I'm one of those people, like, I actually started listening to a history course on my phone as I walk. And I've been listening to this lecture on the Gilded Age, because I thought that might have some relevance to the age we're living in now. And the Gilded Age is when the Horatio Alger stories emerged. I find that Horatio Alger concept, which is still so present in American culture, to be truly damaging. This triumph of the individual, the plucky individual who works hard and seizes his luck, and it's always a he in Alger. It's so damaging, and it leads us to stigmatize and demonize huge groups of people who are dealing with stuff that most people would be utterly defeated by.
Yeah, I think, there is still so much of a tendency in our culture to assume that any success that people have is created by themselves, and that any hardships that people face are created by themselves, right? And that there aren't systemic, to really ignore the systems that we're all part of, and the other. We're so committed to a kind of meritocracy, even when we very much see the data in front of us that is not the case. And so I think so much of our cultural debates come down to different viewpoints on that these days. But it is interesting to see how alive that is.
Yeah, I just saw it today. I saw a quote where Angela Davis talked about it as a byproduct of neoliberalism, this triumph of the individual. I think so many of the kids I see and their parents, I think they're heroic. I think that their ability to survive and sometimes thrive in the circumstances they've been thrust into, and they've been thrust into them. They did not they did not create these circumstances for themselves. And our unwillingness to talk about that part of the story, the attacks on the, I'm going to get the number wrong. I can't, is it 1617 or 1619? I'm so bad at things like this. I have a very
1619. Yeah, the 1619 project.
The attacks on that project. I've talked about this before. It's funny. It's one of the few things I don't think I talk about in my life as a villainess. Is I am achingly aware that I had ancestors who owned slaves and fought for the Confederacy. And yeah, I feel real shame about that. I can't change it, and no, it's not my fault, but it's a bad thing. But in some ways, having to face up to this evil in my family, and I'm using that word with great deliberation. This was evil. This was wrong. And my ancestors did it. And once you confront that, I mean, in some ways, I think it makes life easier for me in that I've given up on the notion, and here we are circling back to my life as a villainess. I mean, I'm a well-intentioned person. I like to think I have great inclusive principles, that I do the right thing. Obviously, that I think it is valuable to talk about not racism, but how to be an anti-racist. That's a really smart book. You know, I want to be that. I think I am that. But my family history is intertwined with one of the great evils of our civilization. And there were advantages that were conferred to my family through that system. And that's, you know, like whenever it's like, well, what about, you know, it's like, we just have to just deal with it. Stop trying to pretend it doesn't matter, or that he was a man of his times.
Right.
Yeah, a crummy man of his times, because there were other men of those times who didn't make those choices.
Well, and I think also it gets back to something that you do write about in a very different context, but it gets back to that sense that like all the things that we struggle to not talk about or not face, it takes an enormous amount of energy, right? And all the energy that we spend, you know, worrying, you know, sort of trying to not show our real face or trying to discipline our bodies in all these different kinds of ways, that we spend so much energy that could be used in other ways. And I think it's true also with facing the past and understanding, you know, hard things about families as well. Like when you're trying to silence something, no matter whether it's something about yourself or about your own family story, that silencing takes energy, and then that energy is not available for other things. And I think we see that on an individual level and on a broad cultural level, that there's so much, when there's so much investment in quieting something, it takes a lot to keep something quiet.
Yes, and I also think, I mean, I think as the book makes clear, I'm actually a fan of social media. And I was like, yeah, they used to say the novel was a debased form too. There's a lot of positive stuff in social media, certainly for me. I've found communities there. I've made friends there. I mean, I really feel like these are people that I am friends with, even if I've yet to meet many of them face to face. And there's that moment that everybody has it. You're scrolling through whatever you scroll through, and you see something that insults a group of which you are a member. And you have that desire to say, not all, fill in the blank. And if anything, I think you should kind of embrace it and sort of look at it. Like one group that I'm perfectly cool with the fact I belong to it, and when I see it being criticized, I'm kind of like, yeah, we kind of suck. It's boomers. You know, we're like, yeah, we are kind of the problem. Big old messy generation that has wreaked a lot of havoc, and isn't going to be around to pay the bill. But even, there've been some really, really interesting things written about the Karen phenomenon. And is it sexist? And I feel like the things that try to push back against the Karen phenomenon are interesting and well-intentioned, but they're very secondary. That, you really can't, I'm not as worried about, it's a fascinating topic when you really go deep into it, like what is a Karen and what does it mean? But the bottom line is that, yeah, no, it's a bad thing, don't do it.
Well, there's so much more I would love to talk about, but our time has come to an end. So I want to thank you, Laura, for being with us tonight and for sharing so openly and thoughtfully. I really enjoyed our conversation. I know that our audience did as well. Thank you to everybody for being with us and for your questions. Next Thursday, there is no quarantine book club because we will be on the cusp of Rosh Hashanah. But we will be back the following week, Thursday, September 24th, with Bess Kalb, who is speaking about her memoir about her grandmother, Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, which is really fabulous. So folks should read it and join us. You can also use your week off from JWA programming to check out the many, many resources we have in our digital archive at jwa.org, from online exhibits to lesson plans to primary sources to our podcast, our blog. So much material to discover. And we also want your stories. You should look for our mobile app, which is called Story Aperture, where you can record and upload your story to JWA. One of the themes that we're collecting on right now in the lead up to the election is voting stories. So if you have a story about the first time you voted or the first time someone in your family voted, we would love to hear it. So check out Story Aperture and share your story with us. And until next time, wishing you all a good night and a sweet and very healthy new year.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. I loved it.
This was so fun. Thank you.